15 years ago, the most feared mafia boss in America lost his daughter. She disappeared from his mansion in the middle of the night. One moment she was asleep in her bedroom, surrounded by security guards, cameras, and the protection of one of the most powerful men in the country. The next moment, she was gone. No broken windows. No ransom call. No witnesses. Just an empty room and a terrified family. The mafia boss was Victor Whitmore, a man whose name alone was enough to make powerful people nervous. His influence stretched across the city, and few dared to challenge him. But even with all his power, he could not find his missing child. Police officers searched for months. Private investigators were hired. Millions of dollars were spent trying to uncover what had happened that night. The entire country followed the story. Television channels discussed the disappearance daily. Newspapers printed the girl's photo across their front pages. But there was only one identifying detail that appeared in every report. A small crescent-shaped birthmark on the girl's shoulder. That mark became the symbol of the case. If anyone ever saw that mark, they were told to report it immediately. But years passed. The searches slowly stopped. The headlines disappeared. And eventually, the world moved on. The case of the missing mafia daughter became just another unsolved mystery. But Victor Whitmore never stopped searching. Around the same time the child disappeared, something strange happened miles away from the city. A young girl was found wandering near a quiet church. She was weak, dirty, and clearly frightened. When the nuns approached her, she could barely speak. The child had no identification, no belongings, and no explanation for how she had arrived there. The most unusual part was that she couldn't remember anything about her past. Not her home. Not her parents. Not even her own name. The nuns tried to help her remember, asking simple questions and comforting her as best as they could. But the girl remained confused and silent. Days turned into weeks, and no one came looking for her. No missing person report matched her description. No family appeared. Eventually, the nuns made a decision. If no one could identify the girl, they would raise her themselves. They gave her a new name, Emily Parker. And from that day forward, that was the only identity she knew. Emily grew up inside the walls of the orphanage. The church was small and old, but the nuns did their best to provide for the children who lived there. Life was simple, but never easy. There were always more mouths to feed than money available. Donations helped keep the orphanage running, but there were constant struggles. Emily quickly learned that survival depended on helping each other. As she grew older, she began assisting the nuns with daily chores. She cleaned the sleeping rooms. She helped prepare meals. She took care of the younger children who had arrived after her. Despite the hardships, Emily never complained. She was quiet, patient, and hardworking. Many people who met her noticed the calm strength in her personality. But no matter how many years passed, one question never disappeared from her mind. Who had she been before the orphanage? The answer never came. All she had was the life she knew, and the small crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder that she had carried since childhood. When Emily turned 18, her life changed again. The orphanage had a simple rule. Once the children became adults, they had to begin their own lives outside the church. It was not because the nuns wanted them to leave. It was because there were always new children arriving who needed space and care. Emily understood. So she packed the few belongings she owned and stepped into the world alone. Finding work without family or connections was difficult. Most employers preferred people with experience or education. Emily had neither. But eventually, she found a job. A job that would unknowingly bring her closer to the truth about her past. She was hired as a housemaid in one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the city. The mansion where she worked was enormous. Tall iron gates guarded the entrance. Luxury cars filled the driveway. Security cameras watched every corner of the property. Inside, the house was filled with marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and expensive furniture. Everything about the place reminded Emily how different her life was from the people who lived there. But she didn't complain. She was grateful to have work. Every day she cleaned the long hallways, polished the marble floors, and kept the enormous house in perfect condition. Most of the wealthy residents barely noticed her presence. She moved quietly through the mansion, doing her job without drawing attention. To them, She was simply another maid. Another worker. Another invisible person in uniform. Emily didn't mind. She had learned long ago not to expect recognition. All she wanted was a chance to build a stable life. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily was cleaning the tall windows along the second-floor hallway. The sunlight poured through the glass, lighting up the polished marble floor beneath her feet. She stood on a small step ladder, reaching upward as she wiped the windows carefully. At that moment, someone else entered the hallway. A 12-year-old boy named Ethan Carter. Ethan was the son of the mansion's head maid. His mother had worked in the house for many years, and he often waited there after school until she finished her duties. Ethan walked slowly through the hallway, watching Emily as she worked. She was new, and he had noticed her around the house during the past few weeks. But this time, something caught his attention. As Emily stretched her arm upward, the sleeve of her uniform shifted slightly, and for a brief moment, her shoulder became visible. That was when Ethan saw it. The birthmark. A small crescent shape. Clear. Distinct. And impossible to ignore. Ethan suddenly stopped walking. His eyes locked onto the mark. A strange feeling rushed through him. Because he had seen that exact shape before. Not in person, but in something his mother had shown him years earlier. Old newspaper articles. Stories about a missing child that had once shocked the entire country. The daughter of the powerful Mafia boss Victor Whitmore. The girl who had disappeared 15 years ago. And every report about the case had mentioned the same identifying detail. A crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. Exactly like the one Ethan was staring at now. Where did you get that mark? Ethan asked suddenly. Emily turned around, surprised. What mark? She asked. That one, Ethan said, pointing. Emily glanced over her shoulder and shrugged lightly. Oh. This, she said calmly. I've always had it. Her voice carried no concern. To her, the birthmark had always been meaningless. But Ethan felt a cold chill run through his body. Because the missing girl would be the same age Emily was now. And according to the reports, she had disappeared around the same time Emily had been found near that church. Ethan stared at her for another moment. His mind racing. Trying to understand what he had just seen. Emily noticed his strange expression. Is something wrong? She asked. Ethan quickly shook his head. No, nothing. But as he walked away down the hallway, his heart was pounding. Because a terrifying possibility had entered his mind. The quiet maid working inside the mansion might not be an orphan at all. She might be the daughter of the most dangerous mafia boss in America. And if that was true, the secret that had been buried for 15 years was about to surface. Ethan Carter could not stop thinking about the birthmark. Even after leaving the hallway, the image stayed clear in his mind. The small crescent shape on Emily Parker's shoulder looked exactly like the one he had seen years ago in the newspaper stories about the missing daughter of Victor Whitmore. At first, Ethan tried to convince himself that it was only a coincidence. After all, many people could have birthmarks. But the more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. The shape had been identical. Not just similar. Identical. By the time evening arrived, Ethan knew he could not keep the thought to himself any longer. He needed to tell someone. The only person who might understand the seriousness of what he had seen was his mother. His mother, Laura Carter, had worked in the mansion for many years. As the head maid of the house, she was responsible for supervising the other staff members and making sure everything inside the mansion ran smoothly. She was a careful woman who avoided unnecessary trouble. Working inside wealthy homes had taught her one important lesson. It was safer not to become involved in matters that did not concern her. But that evening, Ethan's words would change everything. Laura entered the staff kitchen after finishing her work for the day. She looked exhausted as she placed her bag on the small wooden table. Ethan was already waiting. He stood up immediately. "Mom," he said. Laura noticed the serious expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked. "I saw something today." Laura poured herself a glass of water before responding. "What did you see?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Do you remember the story you told me years ago, about the mafia boss whose daughter disappeared?" Laura looked at him with confusion. "Yes," she said slowly. "That happened a long time ago. Why are you asking about that now?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I think I saw her." Laura frowned. What do you mean? The new maid, Ethan said quietly. Emily. Laura stared at him. What about her? She has the same birthmark. The room suddenly felt silent. Laura slowly set her glass of water on the table. What birthmark? She asked carefully. The crescent one, Ethan replied. Laura's eyes narrowed. Where did you see it? On her shoulder. Laura didn't respond immediately. She remembered the story very clearly. 15 years earlier, the disappearance of Victor Whitmore's daughter had been the biggest news in the country. Every television station had reported on it. Every newspaper had printed the story. And one detail had been repeated in almost every article. The missing girl had a crescent-shaped birthmark on her shoulder. Laura had shown Ethan those newspaper articles years ago while explaining why powerful families often lived surrounded by security. She had never expected that story to come back into her life again. Are you sure? Laura finally asked. Ethan nodded. I saw it clearly. Laura remained silent for several seconds. Then she stood up. Where is she now? Probably still working upstairs, Ethan said. Laura didn't move immediately. Her mind was racing. If Ethan was wrong, then this entire situation was meaningless. But if he was right, then the quiet orphan girl working inside the mansion might actually be the long-lost daughter of one of the most powerful and dangerous men in the country. Laura had spent years avoiding problems. But this was something she could not ignore. Later that evening, Laura quietly watched Emily while she finished cleaning the dining hall. Emily moved carefully around the room, wiping the long wooden table and adjusting the chairs. To Laura, she looked like any other young maid. Quiet, respectful, hardworking. Nothing about her suggested she came from a powerful family. But Laura wasn't looking at Emily's face. She was waiting for a chance to see her shoulder. Eventually, Emily reached upward to clean a tall cabinet. For a brief moment, the sleeve of her uniform shifted slightly. And Laura saw it. The birthmark. Her heart skipped a beat. The crescent shape was clear and unmistakable. Exactly like the one described in the old news reports. Laura quickly looked away before Emily noticed her staring. Her thoughts were spinning. Could it really be possible? Could the missing Whitmore daughter have been living all these years without knowing who she was? Laura needed proof. And there was only one way to find it. That night, after returning home, Laura opened an old storage box in her closet. Inside were stacks of newspapers she had saved over the years. She searched carefully through the pile until she found the one she was looking for. The front page was faded with age, but the headline was still clear. Mafia boss's daughter missing, nationwide search continues. Beneath the headline was a photograph of a young girl. Her name was Charlotte Whitmore, Victor Whitmore's only daughter. Laura studied the photograph carefully. The girl in the picture looked no older than 3 years old. Her face was round and innocent. Her eyes bright. But Laura wasn't studying the girl's face. She turned the newspaper slightly until she found the paragraph describing the identifying features. The article mentioned the same detail Ethan had remembered. A small crescent-shaped birthmark on the girl's shoulder. Laura's heart began to beat faster. Because earlier that evening, she had seen that exact mark on Emily Parker. Laura slowly leaned back in her chair. Her mind was filled with questions. If Emily really was Charlotte Whitmore, how had she ended up alone near that church? Why had no one recognized her for 15 years? And most importantly, what would happen if Victor Whitmore discovered the truth? Laura knew the reputation of that man. Everyone in the city did. Victor Whitmore was not just powerful. He was feared. If his daughter had truly been alive all these years without his knowledge, the consequences of that discovery could shake the entire city. Laura stared at the old newspaper again. Then she looked at the photograph of the missing girl. The child in the picture had grown up somewhere. She would now be a young woman. The same age as Emily. Laura closed the newspaper slowly. The possibility was becoming harder to ignore. If Emily Parker truly was Charlotte Whitmore, then the quiet maid working inside the mansion had been living under a false identity her entire life. And somewhere in the city, the most dangerous mafia boss in America was still searching for the daughter he had lost 15 years ago. Laura knew one thing for certain. The truth could not stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, someone would have to tell Victor Whitmore what she had discovered. And when that moment came, everything would change. Laura Carter barely slept that night. The old newspaper remained on the table beside her bed, the faded photograph staring back at her every time she looked at it. Charlotte Whitmore, the missing daughter of Victor Whitmore. For 15 years, the city had believed the child was gone forever. Yet earlier that day, Laura had seen a birthmark that matched the exact description printed in the article. The same crescent shape, the same location on the shoulder, and the same age that the missing child would be today. Laura kept telling herself it might be a coincidence. But deep down, she knew the possibility was too serious to ignore. Victor Whitmore was not an ordinary man. He was one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the United States. A man whose influence reached far beyond the city. If the girl working quietly as a maid inside the mansion was truly his daughter, then the truth had been hidden for 15 years. And when that truth surfaced, it would not stay quiet. Laura closed the newspaper and sat in silence. One decision stood in front of her. Should she ignore what she had seen? Or should she tell someone who could confirm the truth? The next morning, Laura returned to the mansion earlier than usual. The house was still quiet. Most of the residents had not yet woken up, and the other staff members were only beginning their morning duties. Emily Parker was already working. Laura saw her in the hallway, carefully cleaning the polished wooden railing along the staircase. Just like always, Emily moved quietly and focused on her task. Nothing about her suggested she carried a secret that could shake the city. Laura watched her for a moment. Emily looked exactly like the same hard-working girl she had been the day before. But now Laura could not look at her without thinking about the possibility that she might actually be Charlotte Whitmore, the missing daughter of the most feared mafia boss in the country. Laura felt a wave of uncertainty. If she was wrong, telling anyone about her suspicion could cause unnecessary trouble. But if she was right, then Victor Whitmore had been separated from his daughter for 15 years. Laura finally made a decision. The truth needed to be confirmed. And there was only one way to confirm it. A DNA test. The information eventually reached Victor Whitmore. At first, he refused to believe it. Over the years, several people had falsely claimed to have information about his missing daughter. Some were desperate for money. Others wanted attention. Each time, the claims turned out to be false. So when the report reached him about a maid with a similar birthmark, his reaction was the same as before. Suspicion, doubt, and quiet anger at the possibility of another false lead. But the detail about the birthmark caught his attention. The crescent mark had always been the one identifying feature that investigators could not ignore. Very few people knew the exact shape and location of that mark. Victor Whitmore ordered his investigators to confirm the information. Within hours, they gathered what they could. The young woman's name was Emily Parker. She had grown up in an orphanage. She had been found near a church 15 years earlier. And she had no memory of her life before that. The timeline matched perfectly. The discovery made Victor Whitmore pause. For the first time in years, the possibility felt different. Still, he refused to believe anything without proof. There had to be evidence. Only one thing could provide that proof. A DNA test. Emily was confused when she was told someone wanted to speak with her. She had no idea why anyone important would want to meet a maid. When she arrived at the meeting room inside the mansion, she noticed several unfamiliar people waiting. They were dressed formally and carried themselves with quiet authority. Emily felt nervous. One of the men stepped forward and spoke calmly. "We need to ask you a few questions," he said. Emily nodded slowly. The questions were simple at first. Where had she grown up? What did she remember about her childhood? Did she know anything about her family? Emily answered honestly. "I grew up in an orphanage," she explained. "I don't remember anything before that." The investigators listened carefully. Then one of them asked another question. "Do you know anything about the birthmark on your shoulder?" Emily looked surprised. "No," she said. "I've always had it." The men exchanged quiet glances. Emily felt even more confused. Finally, the same man spoke again. "We would like to conduct a DNA test." Emily blinked. "A DNA test?" she repeated. "Yes," the man said calmly. "It is the only way to confirm something important." Emily didn't fully understand what was happening, but she could tell the people in the room were serious. After a moment of hesitation, she agreed. If the test could answer questions about her past, she wanted to know the truth. The waiting period felt longer than anyone expected. For Victor Whitmore, the hours felt heavier than the years he had spent searching. For 15 years he had followed every lead. Every rumor, every possibility, each one had ended in disappointment. But now there was a chance. A small chance. And that chance was enough to make the waiting almost unbearable. Meanwhile, Emily continued her work inside the mansion. She still didn't understand why the DNA test had been necessary. But she hoped the results might finally give her answers about her past. For her entire life, one question had remained unanswered. Who was she before the orphanage? The answer was now closer than ever. The results finally arrived. Victor Whitmore sat silently as the report was placed in front of him. For a moment, he didn't open it. His hands remained still on the desk. The room around him was completely quiet. Years of searching had led to this moment. Slowly, he opened the folder. His eyes moved across the page. The words were simple, but their meaning was impossible to ignore. The DNA matched. Emily Parker was not an orphan. She was Charlotte Whitmore, Victor Whitmore's long-lost daughter. The child who had disappeared 15 years earlier had been alive the entire time, living under another name, growing up in an orphanage, working quietly as a maid. Victor Whitmore closed the folder slowly. For years he had imagined what this moment might feel like, but nothing could prepare him for the truth. His daughter had been alive all along, and now, after 15 years of silence, she had finally been found. The news spread quickly. Within hours, the truth about Emily Parker reached the Whitmore family. For 15 years they had lived with the pain of losing a child. Now the impossible had happened. Charlotte Whitmore had been found. Victor Whitmore's investigators confirmed the DNA results again to remove any doubt. Every test produced the same conclusion. The young maid who had grown up believing she was an orphan was actually the missing daughter of the most powerful mafia boss in the city. Victor Whitmore stared at the report for a long time. 15 years of unanswered questions now had a single explanation. His daughter had never died. She had simply disappeared from his world. But another question immediately followed. How had it happened? How had a child protected by security guards, cameras, and one of the most powerful men in the country simply vanished and ended up alone near a church? Victor Whitmore ordered the investigation to reopen immediately. If Charlotte had truly been taken from his mansion, someone inside his own household must have been responsible. The investigators began reviewing the details of the old case. Files that had been untouched for years were opened again. Reports were studied carefully. Witness statements were examined one by one. And slowly, pieces of the truth began to appear. 15 years earlier, someone inside the Whitmore household had betrayed the family. The person had been an employee, a trusted worker who had access to the mansion and understood the routines of the security staff. Driven by jealousy and resentment, the employee had secretly planned the kidnapping. The goal had been simple: kidnap the mafia boss's daughter and deliver her to criminals who planned to demand an enormous ransom. But the plan did not unfold as expected. Something had gone wrong during the kidnapping. Fear spread among those involved, and the criminals abandoned the child before the ransom could ever be demanded. Instead of being delivered to the kidnappers, the little girl had been left alone far away from the mansion. That was how Charlotte Whitmore ended up wandering near the church where the nuns eventually found her. Without memories and without identification, she had simply become another lost child. And the world had believed she was gone forever. Now the truth had returned. Victor Whitmore's daughter was alive. And she had spent 15 years living a life completely different from the one she had been born into. Emily sat quietly in the room when the truth was finally explained to her. At first, the words felt impossible to understand. She had lived her entire life believing she was an orphan. Now she was being told she belonged to one of the most powerful families in the country. Her real name was not Emily Parker. Her name was Charlotte Whitmore, Victor Whitmore's daughter. The information overwhelmed her. Memories did not suddenly return. Her past was still a blank space in her mind. But the DNA results left no room for doubt. The family she had never known was real. And they had been searching for her for 15 years. The reunion took place quietly. Victor Whitmore entered the room slowly. For years he had imagined this moment. He had imagined seeing his daughter again. But the young woman standing in front of him was no longer the small child he had lost. She was grown, strong, and carrying the life experiences of someone who had survived without privilege or protection. Charlotte looked at him carefully. This man was her father. Yet he was also a stranger. Victor Whitmore stopped a few steps away from her. For the first time in many years, the feared Mafia boss looked uncertain. Then Charlotte spoke. "You're really my father?" Victor Whitmore nodded slowly. "Yes." His voice was quiet. For a moment neither of them moved. Then Charlotte stepped forward. The years of separation suddenly collapsed into a single moment. Victor Whitmore embraced the daughter he had not seen for 15 years. Across the room, Charlotte's mother watched with tears running down her face. For years she had lived with the belief that her child was gone forever. Now the daughter she had lost was standing in front of her again. The reunion became one of the most emotional moments the family had experienced. 15 years of pain and uncertainty finally had an ending. Charlotte struggled to process everything. The life she had known until that day felt completely different from the future now waiting for her. She had grown up in a small orphanage, helping the nuns and caring for younger children. Now she belonged to a powerful family with wealth, influence, and protection. But Charlotte did not forget the people who had helped her survive. The orphanage that raised her had given her a life when no one else had been there. The nuns had cared for her when she had no family. And the mansion staff who discovered the truth had helped reconnect her with the family she had lost. Charlotte made a decision. She would not turn her back on the people who had helped her. She ensured the orphanage received financial support so that other children would have better opportunities than she had. And she made sure Laura Carter and Ethan were rewarded for their honesty in revealing the truth. Without them, the secret might have remained hidden forever. The story quickly became known throughout the city. People were amazed by the discovery. A lost Mafia daughter had been living quietly as a maid for years without knowing her true identity. What seemed like an ordinary life had been hiding one of the most unbelievable secrets in the city's history. But for Charlotte Whitmore, the story was not about power or wealth. It was about truth. For 15 years, her identity had been unknown. Now she finally knew who she was. The orphan girl named Emily Parker had discovered her past. And the daughter named Charlotte Whitmore had finally come home.